The film begins with Miller enjoying ice cream at Wichita Airport in Kansas. At the same airport, Havens is also present, and from a distance, Miller keeps an eye on her as she passes through security. Unexpectedly, they collide, causing Havens' bag to fall. As they are about to board, they bump into each other again and discover that they both have the same destination, Boston. However, Havens realizes that her flight is scheduled for the next day because the flight that day is already full. Elsewhere, an FBI agent named Fitzgerald and Isabel George, the director of CIA counterespionage, are monitoring Miller and Havens through a TV screen inside their car, which is connected to the airport's CCTV. At that moment, they realize that Havens is connected to Miller and immediately arrange for her flight ticket to be changed so she can fly that day. Back at the airport, Havens receives the news that she can fly to Boston that day after all. She immediately boards the plane but notices that there are only 4 or 5 passengers on board. Miller, who is also on the flight, looks slightly shocked to see that Havens managed to board the plane. During the flight, Miller and Havens start getting to know each other and engage in a friendly conversation. Miller relaxes with a drink and shares his lifelong dream of driving to Cape Town one day. Throughout their conversation, Miller occasionally watches the other passengers on the plane with caution. Meanwhile, Havens begins to feel awkward as their conversation touches on personal topics. Feeling a bit flustered, she excuses herself to go to the restroom and freshen up. While Havens is in the restroom, Miller suddenly becomes involved in a fight with the other passengers on the plane. The chaos escalates, involving not only the passengers, but also the flight attendants and even the co-pilot. Although Miller is slightly overwhelmed, his skills help him overcome everyone, including the pilot, who is hit by a stray bullet from the co-pilot's gun. When Havens exits the restroom, she sees Miller sitting with a vague expression. Moved by the moment, she approaches and kisses him. However, she misunderstands Miller's demeanor, as he looks that way because the plane is out of control. With some hesitation, Miller informs Havens that both pilots have been killed and that the plane needs to land immediately. At first, Havens thinks Miller is joking, but when she sees that all the passengers are dead, she quickly heads to the cockpit. There, she finds Miller trying to make an emergency landing on the highway. The plane skids off the road while trying to avoid a truck and heads toward a cornfield that is flat enough for landing. Just after the plane safely lands, Miller offers Havens a drink to help calm her down. However, the drink is spiked, and as Havens starts to feel the effects. At that moment, Miller explains that bad people will soon be searching for her. They will claim to be federal agents assigned to protect her, but in reality, they intend to kill her. Miller also warns Havens that she must avoid getting into vehicles with these people. He explains that he has been accused of being a paranoid, dangerous, and uncontrollable defector by those claiming to be federal agents. Unfortunately, Havens has crossed paths with him. Therefore, she is now caught up in the mess as well. Miller's warning leaves Havens increasingly confused and stressed. Before she can fully understand the situation, the effects of the drug cause her to pass out. Sometime later, Havens wakes up and finds herself at home. There is a message from Miller asking her to enjoy the breakfast he has prepared. As Havens gets ready to eat, she watches the news on TV about the plane crash she was involved in the previous night. The news reports that the crash was likely caused by an electrical failure or a thunderstorm. At the same time, Havens suddenly hears a knock on the door, and it turns out to be her friend Rodney, who has come to check on her. After confirming that she is safe, Rodney invites her to dinner, but she dismisses the invitation indifferently. In a rush, Havens leaves to meet her sister, April, for a wedding dress fitting. While they discuss their father's GTO car, which April wants to sell to buy a new house, someone appears and informs them that Havens' car is about to be ticketed for illegal parking. Havens immediately goes outside to deal with the issue, but she finds Fitzgerald and his colleague waiting for her. After that, they suddenly force Havens into their car. During the ride, Fitzgerald introduces himself as an FBI agent and immediately asks about Miller, showing her CCTV footage from the airport where they met. Fitzgerald reveals that Miller is an extremely dangerous and uncontrollable individual. He also asks about someone named Simon. Although Havens insists that she knows nothing about Miller or Simon, Fitzgerald repeatedly assures her that they will take her to a safe place until Miller is captured and the situation is under control. Additionally, they guarantee that Havens will be safe with them. Unexpectedly, gunshots suddenly ring out, hitting the person next to the driver and the driver himself, who was driving Haven's car. Despite the car speeding out of control, Havens quickly takes over the steering wheel and tries to regain control of the vehicle. Soon after, police sirens wail behind them, and Miller jumps onto the car's hood from a police motorcycle flying beside them, causing a thrilling shootout during the car chase with the secret agents. As Miller fights to save Havens, the car stops, and he immediately retaliates against his attackers with gunfire. Panicked, Havens runs away and hides inside a bus, but Miller continues to follow her. Havens then runs to Rodney's office, who turns out to be her ex-boyfriend and also a firefighter. Still having feelings for Havens, Rodney invites her to lunch at a cafe, thinking that she wants to rekindle their relationship. When they arrive at the cafe, Havens recounts everything that has happened, from the chaos at the airport to her encounter with Miller. Despite her tense story, Rodney seems uninterested and is more inclined to believe that she is just stressed after the plane crash. At the same time, Miller suddenly appears and joins their table, urging Havens to leave with him right away. At that moment, Havens tries to explain to Rodney that Miller is the man she mentioned from the plane, but instead, Miller and Rodney engage in a warm conversation about Rodney's job as a firefighter. The situation escalates when Miller forcibly drags Havens out of the cafe, making it look like he is assaulting her. Worried, Rodney follows them outside. Therefore, Miller is forced to shoot him in the thigh before quickly taking Havens away. During their escape, Miller talks about things that Havens doesn't understand, including his reason for shooting Rodney. Confusion and panic overwhelm Havens, and she begs Miller to let her out of the car. Miller eventually takes her to a parking lot and drops her off. Before leaving, he warns Havens that her chances of survival are very slim if she stays out there alone. He also emphasizes that the only way she can stay safe is by staying with him and strongly advises her not to go home at night. Despite the tension of the situation, Havens ultimately has no choice but to stay with Miller. When Havens stops at a rest area to buy supplies for their escape, she sees a news report on TV declaring that Rodney has been hailed as a brave hero of Boston. Upon returning to the car, Miller begins to explain why they are being chased by Fitzgerald and his followers. The core of the issue is the Zephyr battery, a small prototype battery with a massive energy capacity that could revolutionize technology. This battery is so powerful that it could power a small city or a large submarine. The inventor of the Zephyr battery is Simon. Initially, Miller and Fitzgerald were assigned to oversee Simon in his laboratory in Wichita. However, Fitzgerald planned to sell the battery to a Spanish arms dealer named Antonio Quintana and even considered killing Simon. As a result, Miller took action to protect Simon and the Zephyr battery in a safe place. However, Fitzgerald twisted the facts and accused Miller of being a rogue agent intending to sell the battery. Meanwhile, Isabel reviews the CCTV footage where Miller and Havens were detected and blames Fitzgerald for failing to capture them. Upon arriving in Brooklyn, New York, the two of them head straight to an abandoned building where Simon has been hidden by Miller. However, to their surprise, Simon is nowhere to be found, leaving only a workspace full of scribbled equations. Miller then searches for clues about where Simon might have gone in a separate room, while Havens casually plays with her weapon, unaware of the approaching danger. It turned out, a group of men dressed in black have already infiltrated the building and are preparing to ambush them. In the ensuing fierce battle, Miller, after taking down several attackers, suspects that these men are Antonio Quintana's henchmen, a far more dangerous enemy than Fitzgerald. As the chaos reaches its peak, Miller decides to use a sedative to make Havens unconscious. With Havens incapacitated, the two of them are eventually captured. Not long after, Miller and Havens are shown in a perilous situation. Miller is hanging upside down with his head near the floor, while Havens is still not fully conscious. At that moment, they do not know the exact location of their captivity. Therefore, they decide that they need to escape from the dangerous situation. It turns out that they find themselves inside a plane speeding through the sky. Therefore, they decided to jump from the plane and astonishingly land on a speedboat racing across the water. After some time, Havens finally regains consciousness and realizes they have arrived on a beach. Once Havens is fully recovered, Miller reveals that they need to quickly track down Simon, who is known to be heading to Austria. Although Havens feels angry and frustrated from being drugged so often, she starts to understand the situation when April calls. At the same time, Havens discovers that they are on a remote island in the middle of the ocean. Meanwhile, Antonio is seen monitoring the island where Miller and Havens are located using advanced technology. He has successfully tracked the signal from Havens' phone and immediately orders his men to chase them back to the island. Shortly after, Havens is still emotional, talks with Miller, but their calm is interrupted when an unmanned long-range aircraft appears and starts shooting at them. Seeing this, Miller is visibly confused about how their location was tracked, while Havens realizes that her phone signal is the source of the problem. In this tense situation, Miller quickly rushes to his helicopter to escape. Before leaving, he swiftly makes Havens pass out to protect her and prevent her from being a burden. Not long after, Havens finds herself on a train heading to the Alps, while Miller is already in front of Simon, showing that they have finally met. Back to Havens, who wakes up alone and feels confused because she hasn't received any message from Miller. Therefore, she decides to go out and search for him. After wandering around, she still doesn't find him. Her empty stomach eventually leads her to the dining car for breakfast. Upon arriving, Havens realizes that their train has already reached Austria. As she orders food, a German man approaches her table. When her phone rings, Havens hesitates to answer, fearing that the call might be tracked again. The German man then begins to speak to her, but Havens looks at him suspiciously, suspecting that he might be Simon. Despite her phone ringing again, she does not answer it. However, when she receives a message on a slip of paper stuck to her shoes stating that Miller is currently with Simon, Havens quickly rushes back to her room. Meanwhile, Miller is puzzled as to why Havens isn't answering his calls. Therefore, he hurries to the dining car, thinking that Havens is ordering food. But when he arrives, Havens is already gone. As Havens walks back to her room, she notices that the man from earlier is following her. While passing through the train's kitchen, Havens feels she can no longer avoid him and tries to fight back. Luckily, at that critical moment, Miller arrives. The man turns out to be a German hitman named Bernhard, who was tasked with eliminating Simon. Miller quickly engages in a fight with Bernhard, but this time he struggles and is knocked down with just 2 punches. Havens tries to help Miller but ends up getting caught. Fortunately, with a trick she learned from Miller, Havens attempts to free herself and accidentally throws a tool that stabs Bernhard, which enrages him. Luckily, Miller manages to kick Bernhard, sending him flying out of the train, where he is killed by an oncoming train from the opposite direction. Shortly after, the train arrives at the station, with Fitzgerald already waiting to catch them. Unexpectedly, Miller, Havens, and Simon are nowhere to be found, as they had already disembarked before the train came to a stop. Not long after, Havens is seen enjoying the view from the hotel balcony next to Miller's room. At that moment, she overhears Miller having a conversation with a woman, and their plan to meet piques her curiosity. That night, Havens tries to invite Miller to have dinner with her in her room, but he declines and firmly instructs her to stay in her room. Despite this, Havens' curiosity gets the better of her, and she decides to secretly follow Miller. Miller heads to a cafe and meets with a beautiful woman named Naomi. Their conversation seems serious, which disappoints Havens, especially when Miller refers to Naomi that she was just a friend he happened to meet along the way, implying that she is nobody special. Havens soon overhears a secret conversation in which Miller speaks with Antonio through a listening device on Naomi. It turns out Miller is planning a deal to sell the Zephyr battery to Antonio. Disappointed and angry, Havens leaves the cafe before Miller finishes his conversation. On the street, Havens is confronted by Fitzgerald's men and taken by Isabel, who shows her CCTV footage from the airport where Miller and Havens collided, revealing that Miller was only using her to smuggle the Zephyr battery and avoid inspection. According to Isabel, Miller is a rogue agent planning to sell the battery to Antonio. Therefore, Isabel asks Havens to return to the hotel to trap Miller and ensure that the Zephyr battery isn't hidden elsewhere. Upon returning to the hotel, Miller goes straight to Havens' room without much talk. Havens admits that she followed him earlier, which made Miller looks very disappointed that she did not follow his order to stay in the room. Quickly, Havens signals Fitzgerald's agents. However, by the time Fitzgerald enters, Miller has already escaped with the Zephyr battery. Outside the room, Havens sees Simon also getting captured. At that moment, Simon warns Havens in a serious tone that going home isn't a good option. Meanwhile, Miller is seen fleeing on the rooftops, chased by Fitzgerald's men and police who have surrounded the area. Miller keeps running, trying to evade them. Upon reaching a building by the river, he is shot and falls into the water. The next day, Simon is seen being taken away by Fitzgerald, while Havens is prepared to be sent back home. However, Miller's body has not been found in the river. Additionally, he has disappeared along with the Zephyr battery, leaving a major mystery for everyone involved. The scene then shifts to Havens, who has just been returned by the agents just in time to celebrate her sister April's wedding. Meanwhile, Fitzgerald and his partner are transporting Simon to a hidden location without further explanation. Fitzgerald then calmly places Simon in the trunk of his car and then calls Antonio to discuss the Zephyr battery. Eventually, they agree that Fitzgerald will meet him again soon. Back to Havens, who is busy in an auto repair shop, her curiosity about Miller's death continues to haunt her. She then looks up the address she briefly saw on Miller's phone and heads to the location. During the drive, Havens realizes she is being tailed. Skillfully, she turns her car around and manages to shake off the pursuer. Upon arriving at the house she was searching for, Havens tries to observe from a distance. However, her lack of caution leads Havens to be caught by the homeowner, a middle-aged man. Quickly, Havens lies, claiming that she is delivering a car piston package that the man might have ordered online. The man's wife, noticing Havens soaked from the rain, kindly invites her inside to wait. Once inside the house, Havens tries to build rapport with the homeowner by discussing his classic Pontiac car. Havens also inquiries about Miller, but the man responds with a question, asking why she is interested in Miller. Feeling that she might have come to the wrong place, Havens prepares to leave but is drawn to an old photo of Miller as a teenager. Curious, Havens listens as Miller's mother explains that their son, named Matthew Knight, is the real name of Roy Miller. At that moment, they reveal their belief that Matthew was a former Army Ranger captain and EAGSC operative who supposedly died in Kuwait. They also mention their sudden wealth from a lottery win they don't remember entering. Additionally, they add that their son was an exceptional swimmer who could hold his breath for an unusually long time. This revelation makes Havens realize that Miller might still be alive. After leaving the house, knowing that her phone is tapped, Havens returns to her car and quickly leaves a voicemail, stating that she has a spare battery and is ready to make a deal. Havens then instructs interested parties to meet at a location she specifies. Shortly afterward, Antonio's men arrive at the location and promptly take her to Spain to continue the negotiations. In short, after arriving at Antonio's house and being given a truth serum injection that makes her feel calm, happy, and truthful, Havens explains that her lie about the spare battery was part of an effort to trap Miller. Although she genuinely believes that Miller is a good person who has saved her multiple times, Havens admits that her deception was only intended to trace his whereabouts. Antonio quickly realizes that Havens doesn't have the spare battery. Therefore, the only way to get the battery is by paying Fitzgerald, who has currently kidnapped Simon. At the same time, Fitzgerald has arrived at Antonio's house and demands that he bring the money and meet him at the riverbank where Simon is being held. On the other hand, on the rooftop, Miller, who is indeed still alive as Havens suspected, is monitoring the situation using a tracking app on his phone. Miller then follows Simon's trail and eventually finds Havens at Antonio's compound. Miller continues to track Fitzgerald and Antonio as they head to the river. From the tracker on his phone, he knows that Simon is hidden in the trunk of Fitzgerald's car. As Miller follows them, he happens to see Havens being led out by Antonio's men to be executed. With his impressive skills, Miller quickly acts, taking down each of the men escorting Havens. After that, the last of Antonio's guards is ordered by Miller to tell Antonio that Miller has stolen the spare battery and escaped with Havens. After saving Havens, they both immediately try to catch Fitzgerald, but the effects of the truth serum given by Antonio start affecting Havens. She confesses to Miller that she wants to have a relationship with him. Hearing this, Miller tells Havens to drink water to reduce the serum's effects, but Havens begins to doubt that Miller is happy to see her. In the midst of a hail of bullets, Miller then approaches Havens, tells her that he is happy, and kisses her. After that, they decide to pursue Fitzgerald and Simon using a motorcycle. Although Antonio's men continue to chase them, they take advantage of the chaos during the Running of the Bulls festival, where bulls run freely. At that moment, Miller and Havens manage to outmaneuver Antonio and his men. This dramatic chase ends when Antonio is trampled to death by the bulls. After Antonio is defeated, Miller immediately chases Fitzgerald to the riverbank. Miller catches up to Fitzgerald, but he has already taken Simon hostage. Forced by the situation, Miller hands over the spare battery to Fitzgerald, who quickly flees but not before firing his weapon at Simon. Fortunately, Miller manages to save Simon despite taking a bullet to the chest, while Fitzgerald escapes in his Icon A5 seaplane, carrying the now extremely hot spare battery. At that moment, Simon comments that the battery is unstable, and this turns out to be true. As they watch the plane fly away, the battery explodes, killing Fitzgerald. Moments later, Miller collapses from his gunshot wound and is rushed to the hospital. The next day, Miller wakes up in the hospital, with director Isabel already there. Isabel apologizes to Miller and informs him that she has removed the corrupt team members, while Simon is working in Isabel's new lab. Miller then asks about Havens and is told that she has already returned home. At that moment, Isabel warns Miller to forget about Havens and focus on his work. She also explains that the agency will relocate Miller to a safer facility tomorrow, using the same words she said to Havens. However, after Isabel leaves, a nurse comes in and gives Miller medication, which he takes immediately. Miller realizes he's been drugged, but then he sees that the nurse is actually Havens, who sneaks him out of the hospital and drives him toward the Mexican border. Later, Miller wakes up in Havens' father's classic car, which has been repaired. After asking what day it is, Havens kisses him and says, "One day," referring to what she mentioned earlier in the story about her dreams. After that, Havens drives down the coastal road toward Cape Town. The final scene shows Miller's mother telling her husband that they've just received 2 tickets to Cape Town. Although she's annoyed that her husband accidentally ordered them, she insists that they go, and the film ends. Moral lesson from the story: if you find yourself on a plane with a very low number of passengers, maybe it's time to double-check if it's a regular flight or a high-stakes adventure.